life to my son, and so did he. The doctors told my husband there was nothing more they could do. They said my body was failing. They said my child was slipping away. They said he should prepare himself to lose us both. But what happened next was something no medical chart could explain, no monitor could measure, no science could name. Because in that moment, when hope was gone, when fear filled the room, when life was seconds away from ending, I called out to Jesus, and he answered. This is not a story I was raised to tell. I was born into a Saudi royal family, raised Muslim, taught discipline, honor, obedience, and silence. But what happened in that delivery room changed everything I thought I knew about God, faith, and life itself. This is my testimony. I was born into comfort most people only see from the outside. Palace walls, guards at every gate, silk carpets beneath my feet, a life designed to look perfect. From a young age, I was taught that obedience was safety, faith was discipline, and questions were dangerous. I memorized the Quran as a child. I prayed when I was told to pray. I fasted when I was told to fast. I lived my faith the way it was expected of me, without doubt, without resistance, without voice. And for a long time, I believed that was enough. I married young as was arranged. My husband was kind, respectful, and deeply devoted to Islam. He loved me in the way he had been taught to love, protective, structured, reserved. We wanted a child. When I became pregnant, joy filled our home. The family celebrated. Doctors assured us everything looked perfect. Every scan was normal. Every appointment reassuring. My pregnancy was described as ideal. But inside me, something felt unsettled. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a quiet emptiness I couldn't explain. I prayed more. I asked Allah for peace. I asked for reassurance. And what I felt again and again was silence. Not anger, not punishment, just nothing. I told myself this was normal, that faith didn't require feelings, that obedience mattered more than understanding. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. I was leaving a private clinic when a woman approached me outside the gates. She was older, modestly dressed, and spoke softly. She pressed something into my hands before security could intervene. A small book. A gift, she said gently, for when you feel afraid. Before I could respond, she was gone. At home, I hid the book beneath my mattress. I didn't open it for days. I knew what it was. I also knew what it meant. A Bible. In my world, that book represented danger, a forbidden path, a line you did not cross. But late at night, when the palace was silent and my child moved inside me, I opened it just once, and I read words I had never encountered before, words about love without fear, about grace without earning, about a God who came close instead of remaining distant. I didn't convert. I didn't pray differently. I just read quietly, secretly. And for the first time in my life, I felt something answer back. Not loudly, not dramatically, but gently, as if someone had been waiting for me to listen. I had no idea that the moment I held that book, my life had already begun to change. And I had no idea how soon I would need the God it spoke of. From the outside, my pregnancy looked like a blessing without complication. Every doctor said the same thing. Strong heartbeat, excellent growth, no risks. They spoke with confidence, with certainty. And I wanted to believe them. In our world, pregnancy is not only personal, it is symbolic, a continuation of bloodlines, a future secured, a legacy protected. My family smiled more. My husband spoke often to my belly, placing his hand gently where our son moved. Servants whispered prayers as I passed. Everything looked right, yet inside me something remained unfinished. At night, when I lay awake, I felt a strange awareness, like time was pressing closer, not forward, but inward, as if something unseen was approaching. I returned again and again to the Bible I had hidden, never openly, never boldly. I read it the way someone touches fire for the first time, careful, trembling, unsure. I read about Jesus healing women, about him stopping for those others ignored, about him saying, "Do not be afraid." That sentence stayed with me. Do not be afraid. No command in Islam had ever sounded like that to me. Fear was always implied. Fear of judgment, fear of failing, fear of punishment. But this felt different. Still, I said nothing to my husband, nothing to my family. I carried my faith in silence the way I carried my child. As the months passed, my body grew heavier, my movements slower. The palace grew quieter around me. And with each passing week, I felt an unexplainable urgency, as if my soul was preparing for something my mind could not yet see. The day labor began. I woke before dawn. The pain was mild at first, manageable. Doctors were called, rooms prepared. Everything moved according to protocol. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the day I become a mother. I also remember placing my hand on my stomach and whispering, without realizing it, to a name I had not yet spoken aloud. Jesus, if you are real, stay close. The contractions grew stronger, and then something changed. The rhythm broke, the calm vanished, and the room that had been full of confidence began to fill with urgency. That was the moment everything shifted, and the moment my perfect pregnancy ended. The pain changed without warning. What had been steady became sharp. What had been controlled became chaotic. Doctors stopped smiling. Nurses stopped speaking in calm tones. I saw it in their eyes before they said anything out loud. Something was wrong. They adjusted machines. They checked monitors again and again. They whispered to one another just outside my line of sight. My husband stood near my head, his face tight with concern. He kept telling me to breathe, to stay strong, to trust Allah. I tried, but my body felt like it was slipping out of my control. The pain wasn't just physical anymore. It was consuming. Each contraction felt heavier than the last, like something inside me was collapsing instead of opening. Then the alarm started, not loud at first, just a change in tone. A nurse moved faster than she should have needed to. Another left the room without explanation. I asked what was happening. No one answered me directly. That's when fear truly entered the room. I felt weak, dizzy, cold. My vision blurred at the edges. Someone said the word bleeding. Another said heart rate dropping. I looked down at my stomach and pressed my hand there, panic rising like fire in my chest. My baby, I said. Please, my baby. The room filled with movement. Gloves snapped on. Instruments clattered. My husband's voice broke as he asked what was happening. A doctor finally spoke, carefully choosing his words. There are complications, he said. We're doing everything we can. But his eyes betrayed him. They were no longer confident. They were calculating. Time slowed in a way I cannot fully explain. Minutes stretched. Seconds felt heavy. And somewhere in the middle of the pain, the fear, the noise, my thoughts became very quiet. Too quiet. I felt myself slipping, like my body was present, but I was drifting somewhere just beyond reach. I tried to pray. The words I had known my entire life felt distant, empty. And then, without planning it, without permission, another name rose inside me. Jesus. I didn't say it out loud, not yet, but my heart did, and something inside me stirred. The doctors worked faster. Voices sharpened. My husband was moved away from the bed, and that was when I knew we were in danger. The room no longer felt like a place meant for life. What had once been filled with quiet anticipation now felt tight, crowded, suffocating. The air itself seemed heavier, as if fear had weight. I was no longer in control of my body. My arms trembled. My legs felt distant, numb. Every contraction drained something from me that I could not get back. I heard the machines before I understood them. Sharp beeps, uneven rhythms, sounds that told a story I was too afraid to hear clearly. A nurse leaned close to my ear and told me to stay awake. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were not. My name is Aliyah. I almost died giving birth to the same people who had entered. Grew quieter as the night deepened. Machines hummed softly instead of monitors longer than necessary. The heartbeat. At first, he nodded as if trying to stay composed. Then his shoulders slumped. Then he covered his mouth with his hand. And I understood. They were telling him goodbye. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach for him. But my body would not obey me. I felt tears fall sideways into my hair as I stared at the ceiling lights above me. Too bright, too white. This is how it ends, I thought. Not in peace, not holding my child, but here, in fear, in machines and alarms. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with grief. I thought of the life I would never see, the child who might never breathe, and something inside me refused to accept it. I had never been bold in faith, never defiant, but death has a way of stripping everything down to truth. I did not have time to be careful anymore. Inside my heart, I cried out again, "Jesus," I said silently. "I don't have anything left to offer you. No promises, no strength. Just this moment." My husband suddenly broke free from the doctors and rushed toward me. They tried to stop him. He didn't listen. He knelt beside my head, gripping my hand like it was the last thing anchoring him to the world. His voice shook. They said they can't save you," he whispered. His eyes were full of tears. I had never seen him cry before. "And they said the baby." He couldn't finish. I squeezed his hand weakly. I wanted to tell him I loved him, that none of this was his fault, but my lips barely moved. He leaned closer, desperation overtaking his restraint. "I don't care anymore," he said. "I don't care which God helps us. Allah, Jesus, anyone." His voice cracked. "Please," he said into the air, "whoever you are, save my wife, save my child." The moment he said that, the room went strangely still. The alarms did not stop. The doctors did not freeze. But something shifted, not visibly, internally. I felt it like a warmth spreading through my chest. Not heat, not pain, but presence. A calm that did not make sense. The ceiling light seemed less harsh. The fear loosened its grip. And then, without sound, without warning, the room filled with something I had never felt before. Not electricity, not imagination, light, not from the lamps, not from the machines. A presence stepped in that did not belong to medicine. And in that moment, I knew, before anything changed on the monitors, that we were no longer alone. The light did not arrive the way I imagined light should. It did not flash. It did not blind. It did not announce itself. It settled, like a presence stepping gently into a room already full of suffering. The pain did not disappear immediately. The machines did not fall silent. But something far deeper changed. I felt it first in my chest, where panic had been tightening for hours. The fear loosened, as if unseen hands were holding me steady. My breathing slowed, not because my body was stronger, but because something else was supporting it. The warmth spread outward, not like heat, but like reassurance, like being wrapped in safety I did not earn. I stopped drifting. I was fully present again. My husband felt it too. He looked up suddenly, scanning the room, his eyes wide, not confused, but aware. "Do you feel that?" he whispered. No one answered him. The doctors were still moving, still working, still fighting biology and blood and time. But their urgency had shifted into confusion. One of them frowned at the monitor. "Wait," he said. "That's not right." Another leaned in, staring closely. The heartbeat, my baby's heartbeat, had stabilized, not gradually, instantly. The alarm softened, the jagged rhythm smoothed. My blood pressure stopped falling. Someone checked my pulse again, then checked it a second time. "That doesn't make sense," a nurse murmured. But I knew without explanation, without doctrine, without permission. He was there, not as an idea, not as a memory, but as presence. I could not see a face. I did not hear words aloud, but inside me something spoke with clarity I had never known. "You are not alone." The room felt different now, not quiet, still busy, not peaceful, still tense, but protected, as if something stood between us and death. My husband squeezed my hand and began to cry openly now, not in fear, but in disbelief. "They said you were gone," he whispered. "They said there was no time." The doctor turned toward him, shaking his head slowly. "I don't understand it," he said honestly. She was failing. Both of them were. He looked back at the monitor again. "And now they're not." The delivery continued, but it was no longer frantic, no longer desperate. It felt guided, like something unseen was aligning what had been broken. Every push felt supported. Every breath felt carried. I was not strong, but I was held. At one point, my eyes closed, not from fading, but from peace. And in that moment, I knew, not guessed, not hoped, knew Jesus was there, not judging, not demanding, but present. And I remember thinking something so simple, it almost made me smile. This is what love feels like. The cry of my baby came suddenly, sharp, alive. The sound cut through the room like a declaration. The doctors froze for a second. Then everything erupted. "He's breathing! He's here! We've got him!" My husband let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and collapsed to his knees beside the bed. "They're alive," he kept saying. "They're alive." They placed my son briefly on my chest. His skin was warm, his cry strong. I touched his tiny back and felt life where moments before there had been none. Tears streamed down my face, not from pain, from awe. The doctors exchanged looks, silent, stunned. One of them finally spoke. "We were preparing to call time," he said quietly. "I don't know how this happened." I did, not because I was better, not because I was chosen, but because I had called his name, and he had come. After the room settled, silence fell in a way I had never experienced before. Not the tense silence of fear, not the heavy silence of waiting, but the quiet that follows something undeniable. Doctors stood near the monitors longer than necessary. They checked numbers that no longer justified concern. They rechecked results they had already confirmed. My body, minutes ago failing, was stable. My son, seconds from death, was breathing on his own. One doctor finally spoke, choosing his words carefully. "Medically," he said, "this shouldn't have turned around." He did not sound defensive. He did not sound proud. He sounded unsettled. They moved my son to be cleaned and examined. I watched him from the bed, afraid that if I looked away too long, the moment might dissolve. My husband remained beside me, his hand never leaving mine. He did not speak. He was processing something far larger than survival. I could see it in his eyes. He had prayed a prayer he was never taught to pray. He had called on a name he was never meant to trust, and that name had answered. A nurse approached quietly and adjusted my blanket. "You're very lucky," she said softly. I shook my head, not in disagreement, but in understanding. This was not luck. Luck is random. What happened felt intentional. The doctor returned with my son and placed him carefully in my arms. I studied his face, his small mouth, his closed eyes, the steady rise and fall of his chest. Life, not borrowed, not fragile, alive. My heart overflowed with something I did not have language for yet. Gratitude felt too small, relief too shallow. This was reverence, a recognition that something holy had passed through the room. Later, after the staff had stepped back, my husband finally spoke. His voice was quiet, almost afraid to disturb what had happened. "When I said his name," he said slowly, "I didn't expect anything." He looked at me. "I just knew we were out of options." He paused, and then everything changed. He looked around the room as if searching for traces of what had been there. "There was a moment," he continued, "when it felt like someone stepped between us and death." I swallowed hard. "I felt it too," I said. He nodded once. No argument, no disbelief, only acceptance. Doctors continued their examinations throughout the next hour. Every test returned normal. No explanation emerged. One doctor finally admitted, "Sometimes we just don't get answers." But inside me, the answer was already clear. Jesus had not come to prove anything. He had not come to perform for witnesses. He came because he was invited. When night fell, my son slept peacefully in my arms. My husband sat beside me, silent and thoughtful. "I don't know what this means," he said finally. "But I know this," he added. "We didn't save them." He looked at our son, then at me. "Someone else did." And in that hospital room, under dim lights, surrounded by unanswered questions, our lives quietly crossed a line they would never return from. Because once you experience a God who steps in, you can never again believe in a God who stays distant. The hospital grew quieter as the night deepened. Machines hummed softly instead of shouting alarms. Footsteps in the hallway faded into distance. The room that had been filled with urgency now felt suspended in stillness. My son slept against my chest, warm and impossibly real. Each breath he took felt like a reminder. This moment was not supposed to exist. I watched him for a long time, afraid that if I closed my eyes, the memory of what had happened might slip away or soften into something less extraordinary. But it didn't. If anything, it grew heavier. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused rest. I replayed the moments again and again, the doctors' faces, the words they spoke, the certainty that had filled the room when they believed it was over. And then the shift, the presence, the light that did not come from anywhere, yet changed everything. My husband sat in the chair beside the bed, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. He looked like a man who had been shaken awake, not panicked, not afraid, awake. "I keep thinking," he said quietly, "about how close it was." He shook his head slowly. "They were already preparing for loss," he continued. "They had accepted it." He looked up at me. I had accepted it. That admission stunned me more than the miracle itself. He was not a man who spoke about fear easily. He had been raised to remain composed, to submit, to endure. Yet now his voice carried honesty without defense. I remember thinking, he said, that I would walk out of this room alone. His eyes drifted to our son. And then something stepped in. We sat in silence again, not awkward, not uncomfortable, reverent. The nurse returned quietly and checked on us, her movements slower now, gentler. She looked at my son, then at me. I've worked here a long time, she said. I've seen many outcomes. She hesitated. Some of them don't change, she admitted. But this one did. She did not say miracle, but she didn't say coincidence either. After she left, my husband leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. I don't know how to process this, he said. I prayed in desperation, not faith. He looked at me, and the moment I stopped caring about being correct, help came. His words struck something deep inside me. All my life, faith had been about precision, about structure, about rules, but what saved us was surrender. I thought about the Bible hidden beneath my mattress, the words I had read quietly, carefully. Come to me, not prove yourself, not earn it, just come. Later that night, when visiting hours ended and the room grew dim, my husband stood and walked to the window. He looked out over the city lights, familiar, ordered, unchanged. Yet everything inside him had shifted. We can't talk about this, he said without turning around. Not a command, a realization. Our families wouldn't understand. He was right. In our world, miracles were permitted only within certain boundaries, certain names, and this miracle did not fit. I don't want to forget, I said softly. He turned back toward me. I don't think we will, he replied, even if we try. That night, when he finally slept in the chair beside me, I lay awake and placed my hand over my heart. For the first time, I prayed, not out of fear, not out of habit, but out of recognition. Jesus, I whispered silently, I don't know what comes next, but I know you were here. The room remained still, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt answered. Morning arrived slowly, as if the world itself was cautious about returning to normal. Sunlight slipped through the hospital, curtains, soft and pale, touching my son's face as he slept. I watched his chest rise and fall, each breath steady, undeniable. He was here, alive. Doctors returned with their clipboards and careful expressions. They spoke in measured tones, reviewing charts, discussing possibilities. Sometimes the body responds unexpectedly, one said. Sometimes intervention works faster than anticipated, another added. They used words like rare, unusual, fortunate, but none of them used the word that hung silently between us. Impossible. After they left, my husband sat beside me, unusually quiet. He was thinking. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes lingered on our son longer than before. I keep replaying that moment, he said finally. The moment they said they couldn't save you. He paused. I remember thinking, if God is listening, this is the last chance. He looked at me carefully. And when I said his name, Jesus, it wasn't planned. It just came out. I nodded. It was the same for me, I said. I didn't know how to pray. I only knew who to call. That admission felt dangerous, but it also felt honest. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands together slowly. All my life, he said, faith was obedience, not relationship. He looked at our son again. But whatever entered that room, it wasn't distant. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Family members arrived with congratulations and relief. They praised Allah for our survival. They spoke of destiny and mercy. We smiled. We thanked them. but neither of us corrected them, not because we agreed, but because we didn't yet know how to speak what we had experienced. That night, when the room was quiet again, my husband asked a question that surprised me. "Do you still have the book?" he asked. My heart skipped. "Yes," I said carefully. "I hid it." He nodded once. "Not now," he said. "But someday I want to read it." That was all he said, but it was enough. Because in our world, curiosity itself is a risk. The next morning, I was cleared to leave intensive care. As the nurses prepared my discharge papers, one of them lingered behind. She lowered her voice. "I don't know what you believe," she said gently, "but I want you to know I've seen many people cross that line." She touched her chest lightly. "Very few come back." Her eyes met mine. "You did." I thanked her, unable to explain. As we left the hospital, the outside world felt strangely unchanged. The same streets, the same sounds, the same expectations. But we were not the same people who had entered. In the car, my husband drove in silence for a long time. Then he said something I will never forget. "If what happened is real," he said slowly, "then God is not who I thought he was." I turned toward him, my heart pounding. "And if Jesus truly answered us," he continued, "then we cannot pretend we don't know him." Those words were not a declaration. They were a threshold. We crossed it quietly, without ceremony. But from that moment on, there was no going back. Because once a question is awakened by truth, it does not sleep again. Returning home felt unreal. The palace gates opened the same way they always had. Guards stood at attention. Servants bowed their heads. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had. My son slept in my arms as we walked through halls I had known my entire life. The marble floors reflected the light. The air smelled of incense and familiarity. Yet the space felt different, larger, quieter, almost fragile. That first night, I barely slept. Each sound made me tense. Each movement of my child pulled me back to the hospital room, back to the moment when everything could have ended. I watched him breathe for hours, my hand resting gently on his chest. Alive, every breath felt like an answer. My husband lay awake beside me, staring at the ceiling. "I keep thinking," he said quietly, "about how close we were to losing you." He turned his head slightly toward me. "And how little control we actually had." That sentence stayed with me. Control had been the foundation of our lives. Control over routine, control over faith, control over appearance. But in that delivery room, control had vanished. And what replaced it was not chaos. It was presence. The next days were filled with visitors. Relatives praised God. Elders offered prayers. They spoke of divine mercy within the boundaries they understood. We nodded, we smiled. But inside us, something resisted the familiar language, not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. One evening, after everyone had left, my husband closed the door behind the last guest and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. "I feel like I'm living two lives," he said. I understood immediately. The outer life, unchanged, respected, expected, and the inner one, new, unnamed, impossible to ignore. That night, when the palace was silent, I retrieved the Bible from where I had hidden it. My hands trembled as I held it, not with fear, but with awareness. This book was no longer abstract. It was connected to life, to breath, to survival. I opened it carefully, as if it carried weight beyond paper. My husband watched from the bed. "What does it say?" he asked. I turned the pages slowly, stopping where I had marked weeks before. "About Jesus," I said. about who He is. I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Words about life, about light entering darkness, about fear losing its power. My husband listened without interruption. When I finished, he sat quietly for a long time. Then he said something that startled me. No one ever told me God could be like this. Not distant, not transactional, but near, present. I always thought faith meant submission, he continued. Endurance. He looked at our sleeping son. But what saved us didn't feel like endurance. It felt like rescue. That night, we did not make promises. We did not decide anything aloud, but something shifted between us, a shared awareness, a shared memory that could not be erased. In the days that followed, questions surfaced naturally. Why would Jesus answer when we did not belong to Him? Why would He come when we had not followed Him publicly? Why would He respond to desperation rather than correctness? The answers did not come immediately, but the silence was different now. It was not empty, it was inviting. And for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of what the silence might reveal, because I had already heard His voice, not in words, but in life. There are moments after a miracle when life tries to return to routine. Meals are served, schedules resume, conversations drift back to safe subjects, but something inside you refuses to cooperate. For me, it was the name, Jesus. It echoed in my thoughts when I held my son. It surfaced when I prayed out of habit and stopped midway. It appeared in the quiet spaces when no one was watching, when there was nothing to perform. I tried not to speak it, not because I doubted what had happened, but because speaking it would make everything real, in a way I wasn't yet ready to face. My husband felt it too. I could tell by the way he paused during prayer, by the way he stared at our son longer than necessary, as if still expecting him to disappear. One evening, as the call to prayer echoed across the palace grounds, my husband did something unexpected. He didn't rise. He remained seated at the edge of the bed, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. "You can go," he said quietly. "I'll stay here." I hesitated. This had never happened before. I sat beside him instead. Neither of us prayed. We just listened to the sound fade into the distance. After a long moment, he spoke. "I've said those words my entire life," he said. "Every day, every season." He shook his head slowly. "But the first prayer that ever felt answered was the one I wasn't supposed to say." My chest tightened. We both knew which prayer he meant. "I don't understand why," he continued. "We weren't faithful to Him. We didn't follow Him." He looked at me then. "But He came anyway." That was the question neither of us could escape. Why would Jesus answer people who did not belong to Him? Later that night, after the palace had gone quiet, my husband stood by the window again, the same place he had stood in the hospital room. "I keep thinking about what the doctors said," he said. "How final they were." He turned back toward me. "And how suddenly that finality broke." His voice dropped. It felt like authority entered the room. Not emotion, not hope. Authority. Something that did not argue with death, but overruled it. I reached for the Bible again. This time I did not hide it. I placed it openly between us. My husband did not flinch. He did not look away. "What does it say about that?" he asked. I searched the pages, my hands moving instinctively, stopping where my eyes had lingered before. "It says," I read softly, "all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." We sat in silence after that, not confusion, recognition. In the days that followed, my husband asked questions, not loudly, not defiantly, but sincerely. Why did Jesus heal? Why did people follow him? Why was he killed? I answered carefully, only with what I knew. I did not preach. I did not persuade. I simply shared. And slowly, quietly, something took root. One night, as we lay awake, listening to our son breathe, my husband spoke again. When I prayed to Jesus, he said, I didn't feel like I was switching gods. I turned toward him. I felt like I was finally being heard. That sentence changed everything, because faith is not about replacing one system with another. It is about encountering truth. And once truth is encountered, silence becomes impossible. That night, for the first time, we prayed together. Not formally, not loudly. We didn't face any direction. We simply spoke. Jesus, my husband said quietly, his voice unsteady. I don't know what you want from us, but I know what you did. He paused. And I know we can't pretend it didn't happen. Our son stirred between us, alive, present, a living witness to a name we could no longer avoid. Once a truth is acknowledged, it does not stay contained. It presses outward into conversations, into decisions, into consequences. We did not announce anything. We did not change our public behavior. Outwardly, we remained who we had always been, but inwardly, a line had been crossed. My husband began reading the Bible in fragments. Never long, never openly. He asked me to mark passages that spoke about fear, about authority, about life. I noticed how carefully he read. Not like someone seeking comfort, but like someone weighing reality. What happens, he asked one night, to people who follow Jesus here? He didn't need to specify where here was. I answered honestly. They hide, I said. They lose status. Sometimes they lose family. He nodded slowly. And sometimes worse, he added. Yes, sometimes worse. That awareness changed how we moved through our days. Every visit from relatives felt heavier. Every conversation felt measured. We listened more than we spoke. And yet, despite the danger, neither of us suggested turning back. Because you cannot unsee what you have seen. The miracle was not just survival. It was exposure. We had seen a God who intervenes, and that kind of knowledge demands response. One evening, my husband asked a question that made my heart stop. What would happen, he said carefully, if someone knew? I didn't answer immediately, because we both knew. Answer. It would not be discussion. It would not be debate. It would be consequences. Everything we had, our safety, our position, our child's future, was tied to silence. I don't want to be reckless, he continued, but I don't want to be dishonest either. That tension became our daily reality. How do you live truthfully in a place where truth is dangerous? The Bible offered no illusions. Jesus never promised safety. He promised presence. That difference mattered more than I ever imagined. Late one night, as I rocked our son to sleep, I felt that familiar calm again, the same quiet reassurance I had felt in the delivery room. Not dramatic, not loud, but unmistakable. I am with you. I did not hear it with my ears. I recognized it with my spirit. My husband felt it too. He looked up suddenly from where he sat. Do you feel that? He asked. I nodded. We didn't try to name it. We didn't need to. A few days later, a senior family member visited unannounced. He held our son, examined him carefully, then looked at us both. You were close to losing everything, he said. Allah was merciful. My husband thanked him respectfully, but after he left, my husband closed the door and leaned against it, silent for a long time. He's right about one thing, he finally said. We were close to losing everything. He looked at our son. And yet, This feels like the beginning of something, not the end. That night, my husband made a quiet decision. I don't want to live pretending, he said, even if we must be silent publicly. He looked at me. I want our son to grow up knowing the truth. My breath caught. That was no small statement. Children are not neutral. They are shaped, and teaching him about Jesus, even privately, was a risk that would echo for generations. But my husband was calm, resolved. We don't teach him fear, he said. We teach him who saved his life. Tears filled my eyes, because in that moment I realized something profound. Jesus had not only entered a hospital room, he had entered a family, quietly, patiently, irrevocably, and whatever came next, loss, danger, or sacrifice, we would not face it alone, because the God who steps in does not step away. Life did not explode after our decision. That surprised me. There was no immediate confrontation, no sudden accusation, no visible shift in how we were treated. Instead, something more difficult happened. Life continued, and that required a different kind of courage. Each morning, we woke into the same routines, the same greetings, the same expectations. I dressed the way I always had. I spoke the way I always had. I moved through the palace with practiced calm, but inside, every ordinary moment carried weight, because now everything meant something. When prayers were recited aloud, I listened differently, not with contempt, not with rebellion, but with awareness. I knew now what it felt like to be heard. And once you know that, you cannot unknow it. My husband carried the burden in a different way. He became quieter in public, more observant. He watched conversations carefully. He listened for questions that might carry more than curiosity. He was protecting us, not just from others, but from ourselves. Because faith, when new, wants to speak. It wants to testify. But wisdom sometimes requires restraint. At night, when our son slept between us, we talked in whispers, not because the walls could hear, but because truth felt fragile. I never realized, my husband said once, how much of our lives are built on agreement. He meant unspoken agreement, cultural agreement, inherited agreement. Faith was not only belief, it was alignment. And stepping out of alignment, even quietly, meant walking alone. One evening, I asked him something I had been afraid to voice. "Do you regret it?" I asked, calling his name. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at our son, asleep and peaceful. "No," he said finally. "I regret that I waited until we were dying to do it." That answer stayed with me, because it revealed something neither of us had articulated yet. Jesus had not come because we were desperate. He had been waiting for invitation, waiting for honesty, waiting for us to stop performing faith and start seeking truth. As days passed, I felt a growing tension inside me, not fear, but responsibility. If Jesus had saved us, what did that mean? Was survival the end of the story or the beginning of obedience? I returned to the Bible again and again, searching not for comfort, but for direction. I read about people who followed Jesus quietly at first, secret believers, those who hid their faith until the cost became unavoidable. I understood them now, not as cowards, but as people learning how to walk without maps. One night, after reading in silence, I closed the book and held it against my chest. "I'm afraid," I admitted to my husband. "Not of losing everything," I said, "but of failing him." My husband reached for my hand. "I think," he said slowly, "that failing him would mean pretending he didn't save us." That reframed everything. Faith was not about perfection. It was about acknowledgement, about living in response to what is true, even if quietly, even if carefully. Weeks passed. Our son grew stronger. Each smile felt like confirmation, each laugh like evidence. I began to see him not only as our child, but as a living testimony, a reminder that death had been denied entry. And with that realization came a new understanding. Jesus had not given us a miracle to display. He had given us a responsibility to carry, to live differently, to love differently, to trust differently, even if no one else ever knew the full story. Because some testimonies are not meant to be shouted. They are meant to be lived, and we were only just beginning. Time has a way of testing what moments create. Weeks turned into months. The memory of the delivery room did not fade, but it settled deeper, like something etched into us rather than replayed. Our son grew quickly, stronger, louder, more alive with each passing day. Every milestone felt personal, every laugh felt deliberate. But with growth came exposure. Visitors commented on how healthy he was, how fortunate we were, how merciful God had been. We nodded, we thanked them. Yet every word of praise felt incomplete, like a story being told, with a crucial sentence missing. I learned that miracles do not always bring freedom. Sometimes they bring responsibility, because once your life has been spared, the question becomes unavoidable. What will you do with what you were given back? The pressure did not come from outside. It came from within. At night, after our son slept, I would lie awake, replaying the moment when everything changed, the moment the room filled with presence, the moment fear loosened its grip. I wondered, why us? Not in arrogance, in humility. Why would Jesus answer two people who had not followed him openly? Why would he intervene when we had not earned anything? The Bible offered no easy answers. It simply showed pattern after pattern of a God who moves toward people before they are ready, before they understand, before they agree, before they are safe. That realization unsettled me more than fear ever had, because it meant our lives were no longer our own. One afternoon, my husband returned home visibly shaken. A distant relative had asked questions, casual questions, too specific to be harmless. How did the doctors explain it? What exactly happened? Were there prayers involved? My husband answered carefully, but the encounter left a mark. They're curious, he said, and curiosity can turn dangerous quickly. From that day on, caution became constant. We became experts in restraint. We learned when to speak and when to remain silent, when to smile and when to withdraw. We did not lie, but we did not reveal, and that balance was exhausting. One night, I broke. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the Bible, my hands shaking. I feel like I'm hiding him, I said quietly, like I'm ashamed. My husband sat beside me. I don't think he sees it that way, he said. He took the book gently from my hands. He came to us knowing where we lived, knowing the cost. He looked at me. If he wanted a public confession first, he would have waited. That reframed everything. Jesus had not saved us because we were brave. He saved us knowing we would need time, knowing obedience is learned, not assumed. That night, I prayed differently, not asking for protection, not asking for answers, but asking for wisdom. How do we honor you here? I whispered. Where speaking could destroy us? The answer did not come as instruction. It came as peace, a calm assurance that obedience does not always look loud, that faithfulness can exist in whispers, in patience, in timing. Days later, while watching our son play on the floor, my husband spoke quietly. If one day we are forced to choose, he said, we will. I looked at him. But until then, he continued, we raise him in truth, we live in gratitude, and we trust the one who stepped in. That was the cost of the miracle, not danger, but discernment, not loss, but vigilance. We were no longer asleep, and once awakened by truth, you do not drift back into comfort. You learn to walk carefully, with eyes open, hands steady, and faith rooted not in safety, but in presence. Our son grew into his miracle quietly. There was no sign on his skin, no visible reminder of how close he had come to death. Only life, strong legs that kicked endlessly, bright eyes that followed us across the room, a laugh that filled spaces where fear once lived. To the world, he was simply a healthy child, born into privilege. To us, he was evidence, not abstract, not theological. Evidence that someone had stepped in when nothing else could. And that reality changed how we parented him. We were careful, not only because of our environment, but because we understood something new. This child did not belong to us in the way we once believed children belonged to parents. He had been returned. That awareness shaped everything. We taught him respect, discipline, structure, everything expected of our world. But beneath that, quietly, intentionally, we taught him something else. That life is given, not owned. That authority can be loving, not distant. That fear is not the foundation of faith. At night, when the palace slept, my husband would sit beside his bed and tell him stories. Not from doctrine, from memory. You were very small, he would say softly, and very strong. He would speak of the hospital without details, of danger without names, and then he would say something simple. You were saved. Our son did not understand yet, but something in him listened. As he grew older, questions came naturally. Why do you pray quietly sometimes? Why don't you always say the same words? Those questions were dangerous, but they were also sacred. We answered carefully. Because God listens even when we whisper, my husband said once. And because some truths are protected, I added. One evening, after our son had fallen asleep, my husband sat beside me in silence. I think about what kind of man he will become, he said. I waited. In this world, he continued, or in the one we now know exists beyond it. I understood. Raising a child in our position meant preparing him for two realities, one public, one true. I worried sometimes, not about danger, but about confusion, about whether silence would feel like betrayal, about whether caution would feel like fear. One night, as I prayed quietly, I felt that familiar reassurance again. Not instruction, not urgency, just presence. And in that presence, I understood something essential. Jesus had not saved us to place us under pressure. He had saved us to walk with us, day by day, decision by decision. When our son became old enough to speak clearly, he surprised us. We were sitting together on the floor, building something from wooden blocks, when he looked up suddenly and asked, "Why did God help me?" The room went still. My husband met my eyes. This was the question we had known would come. I answered slowly, "Because he loves you," I said, "before you could do anything, before you could say anything." My son frowned thoughtfully. "Even before I was born?" "Yes," my husband said quietly, "even then." Our son nodded once, as if that settled something deep inside him. And I realized in that moment, faith doesn't always begin with instruction. Sometimes it begins with memory. Our son was being shaped not by rules, but by rescue. And whatever path his life would take, whatever dangers, whatever decisions, he would carry that truth within him, that when everything else failed, someone had come, someone who did not ask for perfection, only honesty, only invitation, only trust. There comes a moment when silence stops being protection and starts becoming pressure. For us, it did not arrive dramatically. It came quietly, through glances, pauses, and questions that lingered too long. A relative noticed that my husband no longer corrected certain conversations. An elder commented that our prayers sounded shorter. A visitor lingered in our rooms longer than necessary, as if listening for something unsaid. Nothing accusatory, nothing direct, but enough to signal awareness. Faith, even when whispered, has a presence, and presence eventually leaves traces. One evening, my husband returned home later than usual. His face was calm, but his eyes were alert in a way I recognized. "They asked me questions today," he said. "Not who." He didn't need to. "What kind?" I asked. He sat down slowly. "About the delivery," he said. "About what really happened." My heart tightened. He continued. "They asked why the doctors were so shaken, why the report was amended." I knew then that the story we had lived quietly was beginning to surface. "I didn't say anything new," he added, "but I could tell they weren't satisfied." That night, sleep did not come easily. I lay awake listening to our son breathe, aware that his life, this undeniable evidence, was the very thing drawing attention. A miracle does not stay invisible forever, not in a world that demands explanation. The next week, a respected family figure requested a private conversation, not formally, not confrontationally, just a request. My husband went alone. When he returned, he closed the door behind him carefully and leaned against it, silent. "They know something," he said finally. "They don't know what, but they know it's not what we've said." I waited. "They warned me," he continued. "Not directly, but clearly. I felt the weight of it settle between us. In our world, warnings are not given lightly." That night, we prayed longer than we had in months, not for escape, not for protection, but for clarity. "What do you want from us now?" my husband asked quietly. The answer did not come as instruction. It came as courage, a deep, steady resolve that did not feel rushed, but did feel inevitable. The following days were marked by small decisions. We stopped pretending confusion when certain questions arose. We stopped over-explaining. We stopped adjusting our words to fit expectations we no longer believed. We did not announce anything, but we no longer hid who we were becoming. One afternoon, my husband said something that made me pause. "If they ask me directly," he said, "I won't lie." I looked at him. "Even if it costs us?" I asked. He nodded. "I think," he said, "that being saved means eventually standing in truth." That was the moment I understood. Jesus had not entered our lives to remain a secret forever. He had entered to transform us, and transformation always becomes visible. The fear returned briefly, not panic, but awareness. Awareness that obedience may ask more than gratitude. That faith, when genuine, eventually demands alignment. That night, I held the Bible in my hands and thought about the delivery room again, about how close we had been to death, about how little control we had possessed. And I realized something with startling clarity. If we had trusted Him with our lives then, we could trust Him with our future now, even if it meant loss, even if it meant distance, even if it meant walking into uncertainty without guarantees. Because the God who steps into death does not abandon the living. And whatever was coming next, questions, confrontation, consequence, we would not face it alone. Faith had been quiet for a season, but it was no longer hidden. And Neither were we. The moment we had both sensed was no longer approaching. It had arrived. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, no guards at the door, just an invitation, a request to attend a private family gathering, smaller than usual, quieter, more intentional. We understood immediately what it was. Questions were no longer whispered. They were ready to be asked. That morning, I dressed slowly, aware of every movement. I kissed our son's forehead longer than usual, breathing in the scent of his hair, committing the moment to memory. My husband watched me from the doorway. "We don't say more than we're asked," he said calmly, "but we don't deny what's true." I nodded. This was not bravery. It was resolve. The gathering took place in a familiar room, one I had sat in countless times before. But that day the air felt different, heavier, sharpened. A respected elder began speaking politely, almost gently. "There have been questions," he said, "about what happened during the birth." He paused. "About the prayers that were spoken." No accusation, no threat, just expectation. My husband answered slowly. "Yes," he said, "there were prayers." The elder tilted his head slightly. "To whom?" Silence followed. It stretched longer than comfort allowed. I felt my heart beat in my ears. But beneath the fear, something else held me steady. The same presence, the same calm. My husband did not look at me before he spoke. He didn't need to. "To Jesus," he said quietly. The room froze, not in outrage, in disbelief. Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else shifted in their seat. The elder's face tightened, not with anger, but with calculation. "You understand," he said carefully, "what that implies." My husband nodded. "I do." Another voice entered, firmer this time. "You are Muslim. You were raised Muslim. Your family is Muslim." My husband met their gaze. "Yes," he said. "And we were saved." That word, saved, changed everything. It was not cultural, not political. It was spiritual. The discussion ended shortly after that. Not resolved, not concluded, but suspended. We left without incident, without escort, without immediate consequence. But we both knew this was not the end. That evening we sat together in our room while our son slept peacefully between us. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, my husband said, "Whatever comes next, they won't pretend anymore." I understood. Truth, once spoken, changes the rules. That night, I prayed with clarity I had never known. Not pleading, not bargaining, simply acknowledging. "We chose you," I whispered. "Now teach us how to walk." The answer did not come as reassurance. It came as strength. In the days that followed, distance appeared where familiarity once lived. Invitations slowed. Conversations shortened. Nothing violent, nothing public. But separation had begun. And yet, something unexpected happened. Peace, not comfort, not ease, but peace. The kind that does not depend on circumstances. We had crossed a line we could not uncross, and instead of fear consuming us, clarity replaced it. Jesus had not promised us safety. He had promised presence, and presence was enough. Time did not soften what happened. It clarified it. Months passed after that gathering. Life did not collapse, but it rearranged. Some doors closed quietly. Some relationships cooled without explanation. Certain conversations never returned. We were no longer at the center of anything, and strangely, that felt like freedom. My husband and I learned how to live smaller lives with greater depth, fewer words, more intention. Our son grew into a child who laughed easily and trusted deeply. He did not know the danger surrounding his origin story. He only knew love, and that was enough. People often imagine that faith stories end with triumph, public victory, visible reward, dramatic reversal. Ours did not. Ours ended with something far more difficult: consistency. We continued to wake up each day, choosing truth over convenience, presence over approval, Jesus over safety, not loudly, not defiantly, but faithfully. I'm telling you this now because stories like mine are often hidden, not because they are rare, but because they are dangerous. There are women watching this who know exactly what silence costs, who have learned how to survive by not asking questions, who pray out of habit, not hope. There are men watching this who were taught strength meant control, until control failed them. And there are parents watching this who know what it feels like to almost lose everything. I'm not telling you this to convince you. I'm telling you this because I nearly died. My child nearly died. And when nothing else could help us, Jesus came. Not because we were Christian, not because we were faithful, not because we were right, but because we were honest. We had nothing left to protect, nothing left to perform, only a name. And that name answered. Jesus did not ask us to change